Welcome back to the channel, boys. Today, we're diving deep into the wild journey of the UFC, how it went from being a no-rules, chaotic spectacle to the global empire we know today. Buckle up, because this ride is going to be filled with big names, crazy stories, and some unforgettable moments. If you're a fight fan, you're definitely going to enjoy this one. It all started in 1993. The UFC was born with one clear objective: figure out which martial art was the most effective in a real fight. No weight classes, no gloves, no time limits. The first UFC event felt more like a street brawl than a professional competition. Enter Royce Gracie, a Brazilian jiu-jitsu specialist who absolutely dominated the early tournaments by submitting much bigger opponents from other styles like boxing, kickboxing, and even sumo. This was a game changer. Gracie's success showed the world that ground fighting could win over stand-up striking, and that's when mixed martial arts really started to take shape. However, the early UFC didn't exactly win over the mainstream. Without any rules, critics started calling it human cockfighting. Even politicians, including John McCain, wanted it banned. The UFC was in serious trouble, and by the late 90s had to change quickly. They implemented new regulations, weight classes, gloves, and even stricter safety protocols. Suddenly, MMA was starting to look like the sport we recognize today, with more structure and a focus on athlete safety. In 2001, the UFC hit a major turning point when Dana White and the Fertitta brothers took control of the organization, buying it for just $2 million. At the time, the UFC was on the brink of collapse, but Dana saw potential, and together with the Fertittas, they started making moves to legitimize the UFC. The first major step: The Ultimate Fighter reality show, which debuted in 2005. The show gave fans an inside look at fighters training and competing for a UFC contract, and it was a huge success. Fighters like Forrest Griffin and Stefan Bonnar became household names after their iconic showdown in the Tough finale, which brought massive attention to the sport and helped the UFC reach a mainstream audience. As the years went by, the UFC began attracting some of the biggest names in MMA. Chuck Liddell, Tito Ortiz, and Randy Couture helped build the UFC's identity in the early 2000s. But in 2006, everything changed when Anderson Silva entered the octagon. His reign as middleweight champion was nothing short of legendary. Silva's striking, his ability to finish fights, and his dominance in the division made him one of the UFC's first true global superstars. His fight with Rich Franklin in 2006 solidified his place in UFC history. But the real explosion in UFC's popularity came in the 2010s with the rise of Conor McGregor. The brash Irishman brought a new level of charisma and trash talk to the sport, and his knockout power made him an unstoppable force. McGregor became the first fighter in UFC history to hold two titles simultaneously, cementing his status as one of the greatest fighters of all time. He brought the UFC to a whole new level, making it mainstream and even attracting casual fans who might not have cared about MMA before. However, the UFC's evolution wasn't just about individual superstars like McGregor. The organization started to expand globally, especially as fighters from all over the world started making their mark. One of the most significant influences came from Khabib Nurmagomedov, the undefeated Dagestani champion who took the UFC by storm. Khabib's rise wasn't just about his dominance in the lightweight division. It was about the global appeal he brought to the UFC. Khabib's success opened the doors for fighters from Russia, Eastern Europe, and Central Asia to join the UFC, bringing a new level of toughness and fight style to the organization. Khabib, who was born and trained in Russia, became a symbol of not just MMA's globalization, but the unique blend of fighting styles that these international fighters brought with them. His ability to mix sambo, wrestling, and jiu-jitsu created a whole new strategy that fighters around the world had to adapt to. And it wasn't just Khabib. Fighters like Islam Makhachev, Zabit Magomedsharipov, and Petr Yan all became major players, adding new styles and perspectives to the UFC. This influx of international fighters has made the UFC even more diverse and exciting, with more styles and strategies than ever before. But the UFC's growth didn't stop there. In 2016, he was sold to WME-IMG for a staggering $4.2 billion. This deal marked a major shift as the UFC transitioned into a mainstream sports juggernaut. Major sponsorships, international deals, and television contracts made the UFC bigger than ever, while platforms like ESPN Plus began broadcasting UFC events globally. This opened up MMA to a whole new audience and turned fighters into household names. But the UFC has never forgotten its roots, with the sport continuing to evolve and grow. The diversity of fighters from around the world, including Brazil, Russia, Africa, and Europe, means that MMA is no longer dominated by a single region or fighting style. The sport is truly global now, with fans tuning in from every corner of the world to watch the best fighters compete. And that's where we are today. The UFC has gone from a small, controversial event to a global sports empire, attracting fighters from every corner of the world and showcasing a wild mix of fighting styles. It's no longer just about a few key players. It's a massive sport with depth, talent, and incredible competition at every level. So that's a wrap on the UFC's epic history. If you enjoyed this dive into how the UFC became what it is today, make sure to like this video, subscribe to the channel for more, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss any of our future content. And I'll catch you in the next one.